Did you hear they found the Titan submarine?
So I guess they got a working submarine to get down
Yeah,
there.
like a real one, a legit one. Quick refresher. This guy Stockton Rush built a submarine. He wanted to see the remains of the Titanic. Experts said that his design would never work. It just wouldn't be able to hold up under the ocean's pressure. And they were right. The submarine imploded, instantly killing him and everyone else inside. In that moment, Stockton Rush joined an exclusive group, Inventors Killed by Their Own Inventions. And recently, I went down a rabbit hole of a bunch of these stories. Some of them old, some of them new, some of them even have live footage of these disasters taking place. And I'm going to tell you about the ones that I think are the most interesting, starting with one that took place back in the 1700s. Henry Winstanley was a jack of all trades. He did a bunch of different jobs throughout his entire life. He worked as an artist, making these really detailed engravings of English architecture. He also designed a deck of playing cards that was apparently very popular, and he even turned his house into a museum for all the strange things that he would invent in his spare time.
This dude's eccentric. This is like a cartoon inventor.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like one of the things he had in his house was a chair that when you sat down in it, the arms folded on top of you. But it was apparently extremely popular. Surprisingly, it wasn't the inventions he kept in his house that ended up killing him. Anyway, at some point, Henry decided he wanted a more stable career, something he could invest in. So he decided to become a merchant, buying, trading, selling goods. And with all the money that he'd made in his other businesses, he was able to afford 5 ships that could haul all of his product.
Hold on, he made a lot of money then to buy 5 ships?
I'm telling you, dude, the house was way more successful than you would think. But pretty early on, 2 of those ships wrecked on the Eddystone Rocks. It's this massive reef like 9 miles wide. And back in the day, it was a huge problem for ships. Here's the thing. Nobody ever did anything about the Eddystone Rocks. At the time, there was no such thing as an offshore lighthouse. All of them were built on the mainland. So the local government assumed that it would be too dangerous to try and mark the rocks. But Henry, he decided that he was going to change that. In the summer of 1696, Henry started construction on the Winstanley Lighthouse. It was going to be the first ever offshore lighthouse right on the Eddystone Rocks. Now, there were a few bumps in the road during the construction process. After all, literally nobody had ever done this before. For example, the first version of the lighthouse ended up being too short. When the waves would crash against the rocks, it would just completely cover the light at the top.
Okay, to be honest, I wouldn't have thought of that originally. If I were to build a lighthouse, I would not have even been it just needs to be light enough for people to see.
But as soon as the waves hit, they were going over the height of the lighthouse. There was also some weather damage in the wintertime, but those repairs were easy enough. Overall, the construction process itself, not too terrible. But Henry had to construct this lighthouse in the middle of a war between Britain and France. And he's in international waters, right?
Right, yeah.
Basically, the British Navy had to send a ship out there just to protect Henry and his workers. Well, one day, they apparently forgot to send a ship. The French showed up, destroyed the foundation of the lighthouse, and took Henry as a prisoner of war. But that wasn't how he died.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, King Louis XIV released him almost immediately.
He's like, oh, this lighthouse thing's actually pretty convenient.
Yeah. We should let him finish.
Yeah, let's get him
We
out.
wouldn't want any of our ships crashing.
Yeah.
Henry's death didn't actually come until a few years later in 1703. Construction on the lighthouse was finished, and since it was installed, there hadn't been a single shipwreck on the Eddystone Rocks. Still, people were concerned about the stability of the lighthouse. Remember, this is the first one that was ever built off of the main land. No one knew if a lighthouse could survive out in the middle of the open water. But Henry, he was confident. In fact, he was so confident that he made a wager. He bet that he could spend an entire night inside the lighthouse during any storm, no matter how big. And it just so happened he didn't have to wait too long because there was what we now call the Great Storm of 1703.
It has a title.
It's got a title. That's how bad of a storm it was.
That's not good.
Just for reference, historians believe that this great storm was actually a Category 2 hurricane. So Henry sailed out to the Eddystone Rocks, surprisingly made it there in one piece, and then told his shipmates to come and pick him up in the morning once the storm had died down. The next day, they returned to the Eddystone Rocks. Only this time, they had a little trouble finding it because the lighthouse and its creator had vanished in the storm overnight. It had just completely destroyed it, and no trace of Henry or the lighthouse has ever been recovered. Since then, there have been 3 lighthouses built on the Eddystone Rocks, and the final one, which was built back in the 1880s, is still standing to this day.
Well, okay, to be fair, he wasn't killed by his invention. He was killed by the Category 2
That's true. The Category 2 hurricane killed him.
It's just his invention didn't do a good enough
His
job of
invention wasn't protecting him from the Category 2 hurricane.
I want to hear about some real inventions. I want to hear about an invention. I thought the lighthouse was going to fall on him or something.
No. But I do have a couple stories where the invention is definitely more at fault. And I actually have footage to prove it. In 1802, André Jacques Garnerin made the first successful parachute jump in England. He leapt from over 8,000 feet above London as people watched from the streets below.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Because back then, like we know that parachutes exist that work. That's so ballsy to
jump
do back
from
then.
8,000 feet
Yeah, man.
is insane. One of the people in that crowd would actually design their own parachute years later, only their jump didn't go quite as well. Robert Cocking. Be mature. Okay?
Sorry.
That's his name. Robert Cocking was an artist in England. That was his job. But in his free time, he was really interested in science. He would just read papers for fun. One of his favorites was On Aerial Navigation by Sir George Cayley. It was about Andre's original parachute design, its flaws, and how Sir George thought that they could be improved. Of course, all of that was theoretical, right? Sir George never actually tested his improved parachute design. But Robert, he'd read that paper so many times, he thought he could bring that design to life. So over the course of about 27 years, Robert spent all of his time working on creating a real-life version of Sir George's parachute. And by 1837, he'd done it. It was this 34-foot wide upside-down cone with a little basket attached that he could ride in.
Isn't that just an air balloon without the heat part?
Basically, yeah. It was like
What a genius.
Yeah.
But I suppose theoretically, I would think that would work.
Now, all he needed was a way to test it. Luckily, these two guys, Charles Green and Edward Spencer, they owned a balloon and agreed to let Robert use it to test his invention. They advertised his jump to the public, made it this huge spectacle, and on the poster for the event, they made a lot of claims that were just completely false. For example, they said that Robert was, quote, a gentleman of great scientific acquirements. But really, he was more of a hobbyist. This wasn't his job. He didn't really have any experience. They also said that his descent would be, quote, perfectly safe and easy. And as you know, because we're talking about this, that was not true.
No.
That was not the case.
It was perfectly dangerous and difficult.
On the day of the jump, the balloon took Robert up to 5,000 feet in the air. And just like with Andre's jump all those years earlier, there was a massive crowd of people watching below. They were all excited to see this brand new parachute. There was just one problem. When Robert made his parachute, when he did all of the calculations, he forgot to include the weight of the actual parachute. He did all of the math based on just his weight and the weight of the basket holding him.
Wait, so he dedicated 27 years to this and didn't think one single time in that whole process, hey, wait a minute.
This parachute's getting kind of heavy. It's 34 feet wide.
This is pretty heavy, and I don't think I did this.
I didn't account for this part of it. So as he started to fall, the parachute turned completely inside out, ripped apart, and just started hurtling towards the ground. At around 300 feet, the basket detached from the parachute completely and sent Robert into free fall until he hit the ground a couple seconds later. And just like that, he became the first person ever to die in a parachuting accident.
What an incredible distinction.
A claim to fame. But that didn't stop people from trying to innovate and reinvent the parachute. 75 years later, this guy, Franz Reichelt, he invented a parachute suit. The idea was that pilots could wear them instead of having to have a separate parachute in case they needed to bail from the plane. Looking at the pictures, it looks more like a primitive wingsuit than a parachute, but I guess if it slows you down going to the ground, it doesn't really matter what you call it. When Franz finalized his design in 1912, he wanted to test it in a big way, leaping from the Eiffel Tower.
How do you get permission to do that?
Well, interestingly enough, the Paris police didn't give him permission. Yeah.
Oh, you just did it. Oh, I like this guy.
Paris police insisted that he use a test dummy for his parachute. At first, he agreed, but when Franz showed up on the day of the jump, there was no test dummy with him. He was already wearing the suit, and he was the one that was going to jump. As Franz stepped up to climb the tower, a group of people gathered around the landing zone. And according to some reports, Franz waved to the crowd and said, "See you soon." As it turns out, it was going to be a lot sooner than expected.
Oh, no.
So I could describe to you what happened, or I could show you.
You could show me. Oh. Yeah, this doesn't look safe.
This is footage of Franz, and you're going to see that he's going to, steel himself here to make this leap. And,
oh my.
And this is them carrying him off away from the spot. Now, if it's any consolation, an autopsy report says that Franz actually died of a heart attack before he ended up hitting the ground. So maybe it wasn't just his terrible invention that killed him. Real quick, I just wanted to jump in and kind of set the record straight about something I saw a lot while I was researching for this video. There is this rumor that goes around online every once in a while that says the inventor of the Segway was killed by his own invention. He died while riding a Segway. But it turns out that's actually not true. So where this story comes from is this guy, Jimmy Heselden. He was an entrepreneur, and in 2009, he purchased Segway Incorporated. He was the owner of the company. And tragically, in 2010, he died while riding a Segway. He accidentally backed off of a cliff. So ironic, yes, but an inventor killed by their own invention? No, it doesn't really qualify for this list. So I just want to kind of clear that up, kind of stop that rumor from getting any further. But I do have one other person in modern times that was killed by their own invention. And honestly, of all the stories, this is hands down the craziest. Mad Mike Hughes. This guy has probably the best about section on Google that I have ever read. It says that he was, quote, a limousine driver, professed flat earther, and daredevil.
That dude's awesome.
The greatest combination of words.
That's the greatest combination of skills you could have.
And believe it or not, two of those things are actually relevant to this story. You see, in the 2010s, Mike was obsessed with two things: the flat earth theory and building homemade rockets.
That's fantastic.
I know, right?
I wonder where this is going.
His ultimate goal? Send himself to space and get a picture of what the Earth actually looks like, which, according to him, is just a flat disk. But the race to get that proof, to get to space, is what would eventually kill him. Let me explain. In January of 2014, Mike did his first crewed rocket launch. I say crewed, but Mike was the only person that could actually fit inside of his homemade steam-powered rocket.
He actually did build a rocket?
He built not just one. This is just the first rocket that we're going to talk about.
Mad Mike Hughes
Mad Mike Hughes built a steam-powered rocket in his garage. And this rocket managed to get to 1,374 feet.
And land safely?
It wasn't a pretty landing. Mike said he had to use a walker for 2 weeks after that crash. But he survived, which is more than I think most people were expecting from a homemade steam-powered rocket. Over the next few years, Mike tried to raise money for his mission. And at first, it didn't go so well. His first Kickstarter campaign only took in $310 worth of donations. There were only 2 donors, so I'm going to assume that one of them was Mike. But after that, things started to take off. The Flat Earth community actually backed him. They ended up raising almost $8,500, which is about half of what Mike said he needed to do a second launch. Which, let me just say this on the record right now. There is no way that I am getting in a rocket built by a guy in his garage for $20,000.
No.
Like you're not convincing me to do that. But that's what makes Mad Mike Hughes mad. He's getting in that rocket. You know what I'm saying? After a few more rounds of fundraising and a lot of technical difficulties, Mike was finally ready to do his second rocket launch. It was on March 24th, 2018, and the whole thing was live streamed on YouTube. Believe it or not, it did go better than the first time, which I guess isn't really saying much.
It's not taking off. Whoa! Holy! Look at that! I don't know if you see that.
So wait, does he just make it?
Yeah, here we go. Look,
he just made it.
Straight up lands.
Oh my gosh! So he managed 2 rocket landings.
Mike managed to reach a height of 1,875 feet and a top speed of 350 miles per hour, which sounds pretty fast, but the top speed of the Apollo 11 rocket, 25,000 miles per hour. So yeah, Mike's got a long way to go before he's getting to space. And honestly, if he had just backed down, said, you know what, this isn't actually realistic, he might have walked away with his life. But Mad Mike Hughes, he's not a quitter. 2 years later, right at the start of 2020, Mike came back for a third rocket launch. This one was projected to go 5,000 feet in the air. That's almost a mile, more than 2 times higher than any of his other rockets. Now, unlike with previous launches, Mike actually needed a ladder to get into this rocket. It was so much taller. So they attached a steel one to the back of the launch ramp. But it was this tiny difference, this minor change, that actually cost him his life. As the rocket took off, the ladder ripped off the parachute cans, causing the parachute to deploy just as it was leaving the ground. With nothing to slow its descent, the rocket arced through the air, reached its peak, and then took a nosedive straight for the ground. The rocket ended up landing about a mile away from where they had launched. And Mike, he was pronounced dead on arrival. But here's the twist. Mike was never actually a flat earther. Yeah, according to his PR manager, Darren Schuster, Mike was just pretending to be a part of the flat earth community. That way he could use them to promote his stuntman career and take their money for fundraising. He definitely scammed them, but it's the flat earth community. I mean, come on. You know, I just want to say right now, I do not approve of Mad Mike Hughes lying to get the money, which is why I am a real devout flat earther. And if you want to donate money to this project right here, you can go to the link in the description below, because we are currently
gathering funding
to build a steam-powered rocket
so that we can get sent in the air and live stream it to you that the earth is flat.
And that's real.